Hi, I'm Rod Saunders from Jew and Greek. The other day, a YouTuber named Ruslan did a video discussing what John MacArthur said about slavery. Now, Ruslan is one of those guys who always speaks his mind, and sometimes I think he's right. Sometimes I think he's wrong. I certainly disagree with his politics and some of his observations about different ministries, but in this case, I think he made some valid points. But whether you agree with him or disagree, Ruslan isn't beholden to anybody except God, and that's what I like about him. So anyway, here's the video of MacArthur on slavery.
It is a little strange that we have such an aversion to slavery because historically there have been abuses. There have been abuses in marriage. We don't have an aversion to marriage particularly because there have been abuses. There are parents who abuse their children. We don't have an aversion to having children because some parents have been abusive. Of course, it can have any kind of situation where abuse can be involved. The reason unions grew up in America was not to free slaves. The reason unions grew up in America was because there were people who had businesses and they were abusing their employees. So to throw out slavery as a concept simply because there have been abuses, I think, is to miss the point. In any kind of human relationship, there can be abuses. There can also be benefits. For many people, poor people, perhaps people who weren't educated, perhaps people who had no other opportunity, working for a gentle, caring, loving master was the best of all possible worlds. If you had the right master, everything was taken care of. So we have to go back and take a more honest look at slavery and understand that God has, in a sense, legitimized it when it's handled correctly by saying this is the way you're to view your relationship to Jesus Christ.
Now, the first thing I thought when I watched this is that he says that we shouldn't oppose something just because we've seen it misused. And he uses marriage, children, and employees as examples. But if you use that same logic towards spiritual gifts, you would conclude, as I and millions of others have, that you don't abandon the gifts that Jesus placed in the church because they were often misused. When the Apostle Paul said, "Despise not prophesying," he was no doubt saying that because people were inclined to despise the exercise of prophecy because it was so commonly misused. Many people today have the same reaction when they hear somebody prophesying. But let's go to the main issue here, slavery. At first, I thought he was probably referring to voluntary servitude, and that by using the word slavery, he was just drawing needless outrage over his statements. But as I listened, it occurred to me that he wasn't making a distinction between voluntary and involuntary servitude. He was just saying that slavery isn't such a bad deal if your master takes good care of you. That's about as tone deaf as you can get. In our modern Western culture, there is a consensus that nobody should own another human being. He says that God has legitimized it in a sense when it's handled correctly. Well, that may have been true in the ancient world where women didn't have career opportunities and there were no orphanages or life insurance companies to provide for people who lost a husband or a father. But in the modern world, people have options. And there's no justification for slavery in a world where people have options. Now, he goes on to discuss the analogy of slavery to our relationship with the Lord. But I don't think anybody would object to depicting our relationship with Jesus as that of a bondservant in the ancient world who loves his master. The problem is the implication that actual slavery, not a metaphor, is okay. It's not. And it never really was. It was just a mechanism that God allowed in the ancient world to provide food, clothing, and shelter for people, or to work off a debt to an individual or society. It was never an ideal situation, just like polygamy wasn't God's plan, but it was tolerated for a period of time due to the nature of the ancient world. Now, I'm always careful about taking somebody out of context, so I thought maybe there was more to this discussion that was left out. But then I found that it's actually listed on John MacArthur's Grace to You channel. So I'm not so sure that there was anything left out that could have been provided for better context. Slavery is wrong. There is no situation in this world of fallen man where it's acceptable. Sure, we're owned by God because He created us and redeemed us and is faithful to love us and provide for us all that we need. But being owned by a fallen human being is a different matter entirely. I hope that John MacArthur and his supporters can grasp that fact. I did a video on slavery and the Bible a few years ago that I'll link to in the description. Hopefully it can provide some clarity on the issue. Thanks for watching, and be blessed.